In this lesson, you will learn how to solve quadratic equations by factoring. You will need to use the zero product property to solve by factoring. If an equation is set equal to 0, then one factor or the other factor can equal 0. You will use that to solve by factoring. Let's look at our first example. We have 6x squared plus 14x equals 0. Always look for a GCF first. 6x squared and 14x are both even. They also have the variable x. So we're going to first divide by the variable or the number, whichever you noticed. When we divide out the variable, we get 6x plus 14. Because they're both even, they're both divisible by 2. So 2 goes into 6x 3 times with our variable x. 2 goes into 14 7 times. So 2x is our GCF, and 3x plus 7 are the leftovers. Because our entire product is equal to 0, then we can set each factor equal to 0 by using the zero product property. So 2x can equal 0, or 3x plus 7 can equal 0. So we'll solve each of these equations. For the first equation, you'll divide by 2, so x equals 0. For the second equation, you'll need to subtract 7 and then divide by 3. When you divide by 3, leave it as a fraction because this will be a repeating decimal, so the fraction -7/3 is an exact answer. So our solution is -7/3, comma 0 in set notation, least to greatest. We can check that with the graphing calculator, so let's look at that now. In the graphing calculator, go to your y equals menu. In the y equals menu, type in your function, 6x squared plus 14x. When you hit the graph button, you should see the x-intercepts are the same as what you solved to be your solutions. At -7/3, so that's 2.3 or 2 1/3, and at 0, so at the origin. So you can use your graphing calculator to help you check your solutions. Let's look at another example. Number 2. We have x squared minus 25 equals 0. Again, solving by factoring, you'll use the zero product property. Always look for the GCF first. X squared and 25 have nothing in common, therefore we will factor this binomial. When factoring the binomial, you will use the difference of squares because this is a minus sign and x squared and 25 are both perfect squares. The square root of x squared is x, and the square root of 25 is 5. So we'll make our factors x plus 5 and x minus 5 equals 0. Set each factor equal to 0 using the zero product property. So x plus 5 is going to equal to 0, and x minus 5 is going to equal to 0. And you'll solve each equation. So we'll subtract 5 to get -5, and we'll add 5 to get +5. So our solution in least to greatest order is -5, 5 in set notation. Let's view that on the graphing calculator. So go back to y equals, type in x squared minus 25. When you view the graph, again, you should see your parabola crossing at the x-axis at -5 and +5. Example number 3. Here we have 10x squared minus 140x plus 480 equals 0. Once again, look for a GCF first. 10, 140, and 480 all end in 0, so they're all divisible by 5, and they're also divisible by 10. If you can view the GCF and find it right away, go ahead and factor it out. So 10 will be the greatest common factor. They do not have a variable in common. X squared and x have something in common, but the last term does not. So it's not a greatest common factor. All the terms would have to share that factor, and that would not be the case. So we're only going to factor out a 10. We'll be left over with the x squared minus 140. 140 divided by 10 gives you 14 plus 480 divided by 10 gives you 48. And all that is set equal to 0. You're not done factoring yet because the trinomial can be factored as well. So bring down your 10 and we'll factor the trinomial. Let's do our a times our c. So a is 1. So 1 times 48. And our sum number is -14. So we're looking for the product of 48, a positive 48. That makes a -14 when you add them together. Generate a factoring list if you don't know the factors right off for 48. So 1 times 48. You can take 48 and divide it by the next number. And continue to divide 48, divide by each value to recreate a factor list. Notice when you get to 48 divided by 5, it gives you a decimal, so that means 5 is not a factor of 48. The same happens with 7. 48 divided by 7 does not divide evenly. And then 48 divided by 8, you can stop there because we already have 8 listed in our factors. So we're looking for the pair of factors that make a -14. Currently we have all positives listed. So in order to get a negative sum, we'll have to do a negative times a negative, and those will add together to give us a negative. Well, 6 and 8 will give us that 14. We'll have to do -6 and -8. If you want to, take the time to check those. -6 times -8 gives you positive 48, and -6 plus -8 add to give you -14. So those are the values that will work for your product sum. So rewrite your trinomial, x squared minus 6x minus 8x plus 48, substituting the two values you found for that middle term. Now we'll do factor by grouping. Group the first two and the last two terms. So 10, again, we'll just bring down throughout our work. The first group has an x in common, and x minus 6 is the leftovers. The second group have an 8 in common, and you'll need to factor out the negative. When you factor out -8 from -8x, you're only going to be left with an x. Factoring out a -8 from -48 gives you a negative, and we saw the factor already, -6. So notice x minus 6 and x minus 6, those parentheses match. So again, still bringing down your 10. X minus 6 will be one of your parentheses. The x minus 8 and x minus 8, the GCF you factored out, will be the other parentheses. and all of that is set equal to 0. So using the zero product property, we set each factor equal to 0. So 10 equals 0, x minus 6 equals 0, and x minus 8 equals 0. But let's look at this first factor. 10 equals 0. That is not true. 10 does not equal 0. That will never happen. Also notice this tells us nothing about the variable x. So 10 is not a solution. We can solve x minus 6 equal to 0 and x minus 8 equal to 0 for our solutions. Add 6 to both sides and we find that x is 6. Add 8 to both sides and we find that our solution is 8. In least to greatest order, that would be 6, 8. And again, we can view that in the graphing calculator. So we have 10x squared minus 140x plus 480. Although we can't view the entire parabola, we can see enough to see that it will cross at 6 and 8. Actually, we can see quite a bit of the parabola. I was thinking about the y-intercept being 480, but that's stretched way up high. All right, so 6 is one of your y-intercepts, and 8 is the other y-intercept. So this does check out with our graphing calculator as well. Let's look at one final example, number 4. Here we have 8x squared plus 18x minus 5 equals 0. Look for a GCF first. 8 and 18 are both even, so they would have a 2 in common, as well as we see an x squared and x would have something in common. But because all 3 terms, so including the now negative 5, 8 and negative 5 have nothing in common. So that means the entire problem will not have a GCF. It is a greatest common factor, so all terms would have to share that great GCF. We're ready to go ahead and factor the trinomial. So do a times c, so 8 times negative 5, which gives us negative 40. So we're going to find the factors of negative 40 that add to give us 18. So recreate or list those factors. So 1 times 40, 2 times 20, 3 will not work, 4 times 10, 5. Remember, if you need to use your graphing, or if you need to use your calculator, just take 40, divide it by the number that you're trying to decide. 6 will not work, it's a decimal. 7 will not work, it's a decimal. 40 divided by 8, we already have, because of 5 times 8, so we're stopping here. In order to get a negative 40, though, we need one positive and one negative. Go back to your sum number to decide. If your sum is positive, you'll want to keep the larger numbers positive. So just put the negatives on the smaller numbers. You're welcome to relist all of the factors saying positive 1 times negative 40, so you have every option, but you won't need those knowing that your sum has to be positive. So look for the pair that's going to make the positive 18 when you add them together. So negative 2 and 20, they make the product of negative 40 and the sum of 18. So let's use those. I'm going to put the negative 2 first, so I won't have to factor out a negative. It does work to put those in either order, but because I don't want to have to factor out a negative in that group, if the first term is negative, I always try to put my negative before my positive if I have that option. Let's factor by grouping. An 8x squared and a negative 2x are both even, so they have a 2 in common. Always make sure you look for the greatest common factor. X squared and x also have an x in common. So you can divide out, and 2 goes into 8 4 times. X goes into x squared, and you have x left over. Minus 2x divided into 2x is 1, so we have our GCF as a 2x and our leftovers are 4x minus 1. Let's look at the next group, 20x minus 5. 20 ends in a 0 and 5 of course ends in a 5, and so they're both divisible by 5. When you factor out a 5, 5 times 4x will get us back to 20x, or you can think about 5 goes into 20x 4 times, and we need our variable x. 5 goes into itself once, so we see that our leftover parentheses do match, so those come together and make one of the factors, 4x minus 1, and the other factor is made up from our GCFs we factored out, 2x plus 5. Using the zero product property, we can set each factor equal to 0. So 4x minus 1 will equal 0, or 2x plus 5 equals 0. Because the whole problem equals 0, each factor could equal 0 in order to solve. Let's add 1 on this first equation. We get 4x equals 1, and then divide by 4. So we get x equals 1/4. You may write the decimal, since it's a terminating decimal. For 1/4, we would get 0.25. On 2x plus 5, we'll need to subtract 5 from both sides. So we have 2x equals negative 5, and divide by 2, we'll get x equals negative 5 halves. Again, you may write that decimal since it is terminating and not repeating. For our solutions, least to greatest, we have negative 5 halves and positive 1/4. Let's once again check this with the graphing calculator. So type your equation into the y equals. We have 8x squared plus 18x minus 5. When you hit that graphing button, we should find that negative 5 halves, so that's 1, 2 1/2, so negative 2 1/2, and at 1/4, so just barely past the 0, barely past the